konnichiwa.
Hola.
Jumbo.
Bonjour.
Hello.
はい、おはようございます。私はマクです。
Hola.
My name is Malek. I'm from Morocco, and the language that I'm learning is Spanish.
Sanskrit.
And I chose to do Mandarin,
German,
Swahili,
Japanese.
French.
I chose this language because a lot of my family lives in Germany and my brother's learning German, and so I thought it would be a good language for me personally to know.
Is because when I was younger, I used to live in Argentina and I used to be able to speak Spanish, and unfortunately, upon moving back to Finland, I lost that skill.
This was because I really love manga and anime, and I love listening to Japanese songs.
No one really around my hometown speaks it, and I thought it would be really cool to learn a language that no one really could understand.
Because I may want to go to university in Germany or may want to work in Germany because I think they have super cool opportunities.
I was initially just interested in Buddhism, but as I got more and more deeper into the philosophy and the concept of it, I was more interested in the language that the scriptures of Buddhism were originally written in.
The kind of skills I need to achieve my goals is that for both Chinese and Japanese, I'm trying to build my fluency. So basically, I'm trying to gain a mixture of talking and speaking practice as well as basics of the language like grammar and vocabulary.
Becoming more acquainted with the more formal way of speaking it as opposed to the more colloquial way that it's commonly spoken. And I also just have a desire to be able to write literature and, science papers and whatever in Swahili.
Mainly speaking, but for this school year I decided to focus a lot more on the writing to gain my confidence and understand Spanish on a ground level.
My project was just tons of research and really just getting deep into what the culture is, which is what I'm really interested in.
I need a lot of reading and writing comprehension skills, and being able to use correct grammar and things like that, and know how to make things sound proper or improper depending on the circumstance.
In order to live in Japan, I need to become totally fluent, which means mastering like all 4 areas of the language: reading, listening, speaking, writing.
When I was starting to learn German, I started with Duolingo, which was pretty simple. But then when I finished Duolingo, I moved to harder stuff, like books, grammar books. I started reading a little bit. I started watching some shows. And yeah, so like I don't really have a preferred style to learn German. I think like everything you do related to the language you're learning, like everything you do is helpful in its own way.
I don't really like using a lot of grammatical things, even though I was doing writing, so eventually I had to go back to that. But I used a lot of like reading short stories and using actual skills to discover what works and what doesn't. I listened to quite a bit of music. I listened to some podcasts as well as watched a couple movies to get more of my understanding of Spanish as a speaker rather than just a writer.
Last year I used a lot of exam preparation materials, but then this year, now that my goal has changed, I'd say that right now what I'm doing, so I'm looking at songs, looking at the translation, and picking up on the words that appear a lot. I said that it's a really good strategy for me to learn new vocabularies and stuff like that.
Basic foundational knowledge on Sanskrit alphabets as well as the grammars. I just wanted to understand this vastly different language a bit better, and perhaps I could learn it further in the more professional or educational setting. But for now, what my purpose was to set the stepping stone.
I was really interested in studying the Berlin Wall, specifically because it had a big impact on my family, and I remember hearing stories about it as a kid, so it was something that always fascinated me, and I decided that this was kind of a good chance to intermix the language and the history and culture.
So that drove me to do my project or summative on a Mandarin cookbook comparing traditional Chinese food to American Chinese food.
My summative for this project is the telenovela scripts that we wrote with the telenovela team.
My summative project this year is kind of combined with my module project, which is hand weaving a tapestry. I chose to study two French artists, Matisse and Monet, and write a bit about their work and their influence as French artists and on the history of art. I took elements from their style and put it into my own tapestry, which I just finished weaving today.
The summative that I've made is a journal of my progress in learning Japanese. It's pretty simple. It's just a bunch of reflections on how I learned Japanese. And then I also wrote a document, like a 2-page kind of pamphlet about the explaining the curriculum that I designed myself for learning Japanese.
My summative for this project is I'm writing a short book on Pan-Africanism in Swahili.
A project for my summative, I chose the telenovela project, where we literally wrote a script for a telenovela that will be acting out next year, hopefully.
For my summative project, I decided to work on an essay about what could happen after coronavirus.
In terms of challenges, I would say that the biggest one would be in my sort of lack of actual speaking knowledge. I don't speak Spanish at home, so it's very difficult for me to actually get into the flow of speaking it regularly.
My biggest challenge to completing my project was finding really good resources in French and being able to understand them in a reasonable time frame. I'm kind of a beginner at French, so reading historical essays in French is a little bit above my level, so it was a bit of a challenge to find good resources.
My biggest challenge was probably the program I was using it's called Canva, and it was a little difficult for me because I didn't have the premium version, so all this stuff got missed.
The biggest challenge to complete the language project was because I was writing dialogues, I kept sort of using expressions in English or in another language and translating them. But language does not really work that way, and so I had to sort of make myself think in Spanish, if that makes sense.
I learned a lot about how I personally learn language independently best. I think that was a challenge in the beginning, was finding a way that I could learn the language independently and stay motivated. But then I think in the end I was able to learn about the culture and express what I learned about the Berlin Wall while using the German language.
Of course, learning the language was the biggest part, but I also learned a lot about myself and my work ethic. And I also changed a lot my work ethic, if I think about it. Before, I was just learning because I had to learn, and that's pretty much it. But with the German language, when I started learning German, I focused first on learning a lot about the culture, learning basically how to love the language. And that's exactly what I did, and it worked so much that to this day, after learning intensive German for a year, I'm not sick of the language. I could study hours in a day, and I could see a lot of German text and do a lot of German work, and I really don't get exhausted because I learned how to love my work.
My significant learning takeaway is that learning a language is a progress and that it does not happen quickly, and you need to be patient and also, most importantly, consistent with it.
And my significant learning takeaways from this is not to ever waste time trying to find a teacher, because I spent my I spent like the second and first term wasting time just looking for a teacher, and that's not my way of learning. I prefer to teach myself and to do it proper autodidact style.
I think my biggest takeaway from this year's language projects is just how hard it is to learn a language, how much of an uphill battle it is. And I think that it's honestly been one of my biggest successes to know that even though there's so much more to learn, that I'm okay with that and that I'm ready for the challenge.
Au revoir.
Matane.
Adios.
Kwaheri.
Oh, auf Wiedersehen.
Sayonara.
再见.
So thanks for listening. Goodbye.